I imagine it must be what I perceive durian to be, but anyways. Thank you guys for staying, firstly, to the end of the day. I realized I pulled the long straw and I get one of the very last presentations. So during the introduction, I actually counted 3 yawns in the audience. So I know you guys are tired. So we can do 2 things. One is, let's get some energy into the room, and you can help me with a statistics study. So bear with me, everybody stand up. So I want you to think about, you can choose any of these numbers, 0, 1, or 2. Your choice, you can figure that out. Now don't do anything yet, but I will tell you when, and when I tell you when, you need to have a specific hand position. So if your number was 0, then think about here together. If your number was 1, about here, chest width, and if your number was 2, about a little bit further, about shoulder width, okay? So now, on the count of 3, I want you to put your hands up and leave them where they are so I can see it. So 1, 2, 3, go. Now wait there, hold on a second. Okay, thank you. There was no statistics study, it's just that I had a bet with my daughter that I could get a standing ovation. So thank you, that would be free car washes for a month. Excellent, you can sit down. Let me talk about innovation. It works when it's on the, yeah. My role at Amazon, I work for Amazon Web Services, which is the cloud computing part of Amazon. It's the geeky IT side of Amazon. And my role, I run the professional services organization in Asia Pac, Japan, and China. And our role, professional services role, is to help the largest enterprises in the region adopt the cloud. And when I first joined, I joined 4 years ago, and I thought obviously that my role would be to help companies adopt the cloud. And that turned out to be completely false. What ends up happening is for about 9 to 12 months, when a large enterprise comes onto the cloud, it's about cloud adoption. And so it's very technical. But what ultimately happens at about 12 months is they start realizing all the cost benefits. They have made the transformation in their security, so they're getting better security already. And then they turn to me and say, okay, that's done, but how do you actually impact revenue? How do you change cost is okay, but we believe that the cloud can make us a different business. So how is Amazon so innovative? What does Amazon do? And so interestingly, at about 1 year in, all my conversations have turned to essentially innovation. And how can we help the largest enterprise that we work with become innovative? And there's a certain assumption built into that. And actually, when I talk to my customers, it's really loud and clear. They feel that they suck at innovation. They feel, all of them feel that they're terrible. And I bet even in this room, a lot of you guys think to your company, say, actually, we're not very good at innovation, so we're here to learn from other people. And what I've actually found is true is that everybody is very good at innovation. It's just that they're good at a particular kind of innovation, which is incremental innovation. That is taking a cash cow product and making it better and better and better year after year. And all the companies, because obviously I'm working for the largest enterprises, so they must be good at innovation because they're successful. And they're all good at that. But the problem that they see right now is that suddenly they're being attacked from all sides because of market disruption, IT. Sooner or later, Amazon will come into their business, for goodness sakes. And so what they're worried about is not that they're bad at innovation, it's that they're not good at disruptive innovation or new product development. They're great at taking existing products and making better, not necessarily so good at coming up with brand new products. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is a relatively new way of thinking about new product development in particular. And it starts with one sad fact. And that sad fact is that according to Harvard Business Review study, 85% of new product development efforts fail. And if you think about your own companies and you think about your R&D budgets or your new product development budgets every year, your change the business budgets, think back across the last 10 years, and I think you probably intuitively agree with this number. I mean, of course, it's Harvard, so it's right. But in all my experiences, it's like this, right? If I think about my change the business budget, actually 85% is essentially going down the drain. And if I think about just all the companies represented in this room, and we add up all of your change the business budgets every year, that's trillions of dollars, which is essentially being thrown away as waste every year. It's horrible. And worse yet, during these times of market disruption, we know that, hey, 50% of the blue chips companies say, we know the stat, right? Disruption means big companies are going to be going under. And so it's a very dangerous time, and new product development is the only safe haven. You can't take an existing cash cow and just keep making it better in a disruptive time in the market. That won't work. You have to respond to disruption with disruption. So the question that Lean Enterprise asks is, what if we could reduce that waste just by 10%? And we don't say, can I be 100% successful at new product development? It doesn't say that, right? All we're saying here is, let's assume 90% of my products are failure. I don't say 85 because I'm not so good at math, so we're going to say 90% are failure. And let's just move that to 70% failure. If we can do that, we're going from 1 hit product a year to 3 hit products a year. So we're actually tripling the top line. So this is a big deal. So even a small improvement in the waste in the process of new product development can have really dramatic impact on our profitability as companies. And the other thing that we need to do is we need to be fast. It's not just about being good at new product development. In this age, we have to be very fast because startups are coming at us from every direction, and even our competitors are coming at, and of course, folks even not even classically in our industries are now coming after us. So we have to be good and we have to be fast. The good news, of course, is if we think about the problem of solving waste, there's really, really good proven tools that already exist that have been around for many years. And it really starts in the 1980s with Toyota. And Toyota had a particular problem. They were about to disrupt the industry of automobile manufacture, and they wanted to go from low volume, high margin products. That's what existed at that time. And they said, we're going to disrupt that completely, and we're going to go after high volume, low margin business. In order to do that, you can't have a situation where there's mistakes in your assembly line. And at that time in the 80s, there were loads of mistakes coming out of the automobile manufacturers because they were focused on, just we have high margin, we can go back and remake the car, no problem. But for Toyota, they wouldn't be able to afford to remake cars that came off the assembly line wrong. And so they thought, how can we redesign how we manufacture? And they came up with a program called Toyota Production System, which is talked about in this book. And by the way, I know this great e-commerce bookseller where you can get a discount on this book in particular. But they came up with the Toyota Production System, and they applied it to their manufacturing, and lo and behold, they did awesome, as we know now 40 years later. And in fact, not only did Toyota do awesome with the Toyota Production System, but if you go to any manufacturing plant anywhere in the world, Singapore, Malaysia, to Mexico, to Russia, anywhere, all manufacturing plants today use some version of the Toyota Production System. 100% do. Because if you don't use it, you're simply not going to be cost competitive for making products. So TPS, Toyota Production System, was actually very successful. But the story didn't stop there. So in the 90s, a group of people got together who were familiar with TPS and said, wow, it's amazing what Toyota has done with this process improvement. But actually, if we look at the TPS, there's no reason it has to only be applied to automobile manufacturing. Actually, TPS could be applied to any process from managing credit card application forms to tying your shoelace. Any process should benefit from Toyota Production System. And so these guys in the 90s said, let's take that and apply it to what is now known as Lean Six Sigma. So this is a process by which we can improve any process by reducing the waste of any particular process. And again, if you look today in any of the operations functions that you guys have in your own companies, roughly 100% of operations businesses are using some form of Lean Six Sigma to remove waste out of the operational process today. So again, it was a very successful meme, a very successful idea on how to re-engineer processes. Now, these are cost-based processes, and I told you before we're interested in revenue. And so the question is, how do you apply Toyota Production System from the 80s, Lean Six Sigma from the 90s, into revenue? And fortunately, once again, we actually have proven tools to do that, and the proven tools come from the noughties, and that was the era of the startups. And in the era of the startups, I'm sure you'll remember this idea, is that venture capitalists had this idea. I invest in 10 companies, and one of them is going to be a unicorn. It doesn't matter if the other 9 are total failures. It's fine, because the one unicorn gets me all the return I want on the initial capital spent on all 10. That was a very common statistics used by the venture capitalists in the 90s. But venture capitalists are greedy. They're capitalists, right? So they want more. So they said, well, this is waste. Why is it that 9 companies fail and only 1 succeeds? How can we reduce the wastage of the 9 so that there can be 2 successful unicorns and 8 failures, or 3 or 4? If you're Sequoia, it's 4. And so out came Lean Startup. And Lean Startup essentially said, let's take the ideas of removing waste in production processes from Toyota Production System, as interpreted by Lean Six Sigma, and apply it to the process of new product development. And in this case, right, it's a startup, so it's the same as new product and new company. They're one, because the startup only has one product. And of course, as we know in retrospect, look back, every single one of the unicorns from the noughties was a proponent of Lean Startup. Even Amazon, where I come from, we didn't call it Lean Startup in those early days because that word didn't exist. But if I look through the principles of Lean Startup, actually Amazon was and continues to be a Lean Startup. So you look at the success rate of this idea, and it's quite profound. All of the successful unicorns were. So 80s, we have Toyota Production System. 90s, we have Lean Six Sigma. Noughties, we have Lean Startup. And of course, the last of the game is always the large enterprise. But Steve Blank, who's one of the Lean Startup proponents, said Lean Startup is a new strategy for the 21st century corporation. And what he was basically saying is, actually, the same process of new product development exists in enterprises just like it does in startups. It's just that they have more products and more money to put into them. And so we can actually, again, take all these ideas and apply it to a giant corporation. In terms of the principles, Lean Enterprise is actually quite simple. There's really only 4 principles that you have to go through. And I'll try to talk through as many of these as I can, although I know I only have 30 minutes, so I'm rushing. And I want to start with the first one. Of course, it comes from Japan, so accept that you know nothing, very zen, makes sense that it comes from Japan. That's the first one. And the basic idea of accept that you know nothing works like this. So I would say in the 90s, there was this belief, and I heard it before when we were doing our discussions, is that there's the reason that products are not finding resonance in marketplaces is because there's this wall between marketing and engineering. And marketing would say, I want this product, throw it over the wall, product R&D catches it, builds something, throws it back, marketing catches it and says, this isn't what I asked for, wasn't what I wanted. And that was a hypothesis in the 90s. And I think all of us have spent a lot of time and money and effort to tear down that wall over the years. Some more successful than others. I would say the companies that I work with, generally speaking, they have solved that problem. And now they have proper cross-functional teams, marketing, product engineering, and even admin, everybody coming to legal, finance, everyone coming together in a cross-functional team to build out products. So I think today, generally speaking, we're doing much better. However, the 85% from Harvard Business Review still stands. So although we've torn down that wall, it didn't fix the problem. I think it was a good wall to tear down, but it unfortunately hasn't improved our success rate any. So Lean Enterprise says, actually, there's another wall. And that's the more important wall. And that's the wall between your company and your customers. And so by show of hands, salespeople aren't allowed to raise their hand because it doesn't make sense. Who here has actually gone out over the last week and spoken with customers, watched them use the products? Okay, very few. Don't feel bad if you didn't raise your hand. It's normal. We have status reporting. We have email. We have voice calls. So many other things that we have to do. It's actually normal that none of us actually, even though we know we should talk to the customers, we actually don't talk to the customers. But don't feel bad, because it's not actually a problem. On the one hand, it seems bad that we don't understand what our customers think. But on the other hand, if we do go and talk to them, we say in Singapore, all blur like sotong. They also don't know what they want. It's that Henry Ford had this attributed quote, and Henry Ford said, if I had gone and asked my customers what they had wanted, they would have told me faster horses, because the product class of an automobile didn't exist in anyone's mind. So there was no way that a customer would have been able to foresee, other than Henry Ford himself, they wouldn't have been able to foresee that there would be this thing called an automobile. In fact, even the original automobiles were quite terrible relative to horses. So the thing about new product development, which is different from incremental innovation, with new product development, you can't ask your customer what they want because they don't know. With new product development, it has never been seen before. So they have no reference point by which to tell you what they want. So this is the crux. This is the problem. This is why we're ultimately in uncertainty in enterprises. And of course, when an enterprise is faced with uncertainty, what do? They do this, which you all have done for many years. This is where the trillions of dollars go, because ultimately, and we know that this is true, not just because of Harvard Business Review, because of all of our own experience, all of that stuff is just crossing your fingers and hoping it'll work. That's it. And none of it works. Because we don't know what the customer wants and the customer doesn't know what they want. So it makes sense when we launch a product, it's a likelihood that the market won't adopt it because it's essentially just a guess. So what's the alternative? So in Lean Enterprise, the alternative is all about your primary school science class, and it's about experimentation and testing. So there's this idea, I'm sure many of you have even said this to your colleagues and to your reporting. Innovators love failure. Be comfortable failing. Get happy with it. Fail more often. Not true. All lies. I consider myself an entrepreneur, and I never once woke up during my startup days and said, okay, I'm going to fail. Yeah, let's do it. Let's fail. No, you say let's succeed. Now, you have to be able to stand back up after you've failed and keep working. That you need. You need persistence. But cult of failure, please don't drive cult of failure out into your organizations and think that's going to make you more innovative. It won't. Culture of success still matters. So that one is busted. So what do entrepreneurs actually do? Entrepreneurs and innovators experiment. And remember back from your primary school science class to the scientific method. And the scientific method basically says, we will come up with a hypothesis, something we believe about the world. And in marketing, we call that a product market fit. I believe this product will fit with that market. And that's our hypothesis. Then we go out to the world and we test that. And we don't ask people, we run an actual experiment. We collect the data and decide, was our hypothesis correct or incorrect? If it turns out that it was correct, great, we move forward. If it turns out it was incorrect, no problem, go back and rewrite the hypothesis. So that's the same thing with lean enterprises. We run experiments to either confirm or reject a hypothesis. And the nice thing, the trickery of science is it can't be wrong because it sets itself up that both ways you learn. There's no being right or wrong in science, you just learn more. And so experiments is how we do it. Does anyone know, by the way, what this guy is? It's not just a mouse. That's the first mouse from Xerox PARC. By the way, 36 cents and 1 afternoon to build this thing. Did it ever go out? Was this ever sold? No. How many people have heard the term minimum viable product? Raise your hand. Should be the whole room at this point. Okay. If I asked you, I won't single anyone out, but if I asked you, all of you, I think, would say, what's the definition of minimum viable product? It's the product with the fewest amount of features that we can actually take and launch to the market so that we can learn. Does anyone disagree vehemently? Okay, thank goodness, one, all right, so 1%. 1%. But actually, if you go out and canvas go back in your own enterprise and ask, what do you mean by MVP? Because people use it all the time. They'll say some version of that. Product with the fewest number of features that we can take to market. That's the opposite of what MVP actually means. And it's a dangerous mistake, because if we say, we're going to launch, remove MVP and all the hype away and just listen to this sentence. we're going to launch the product with the fewest amount of features to market and let the customers use that. What will they do? They won't use it. Who wants to use the product with the fewest amount of possible features? This is not the way to delight your customer. This is the way to bore your customer. Think about it this way. Think about taking your significant other out on the minimum viable date. No one gets lucky that night, right? So this idea that minimum viable product is the product with the fewest amount of features is not only wrong, but it's dangerous to your organization. MVP, which comes from lean enterprise, means something else. MVP means it's the experiment, that the cheapest and quickest experiment that we can run to learn to test a hypothesis about product market fit. That's what MVP actually is. And so you notice this is an MVP. It was never sold, never launched. It's not a product. But they used it to test in the lab about how people interacted with a computer. I'll be a bit more extreme with an example. In Lean Enterprise, we call this concierge services. And again, it's not a real product. MVP, don't think of it as a product. Think of it as an experiment. So Instagram, when they first started, they had a hypothesis. They believed that tourists would love professional level photographs of their trips, but they didn't know how to use Photoshop, or they didn't have a laptop when they were traveling. So they thought that was their hypothesis. And what they didn't do, raise $20 million and go build the Instagram software and launch it and see what happened. Instead, they said, well, the three founders they were in New York, so they went to Central Park with their laptops and walked around to people who are taking pictures and said, hey, we're professional designers and we're creating a startup. Would you mind if I shopped your picture and then you can post it to Facebook and everybody will be happy? And they walked around that for a few weeks, just doing that. And fortunately, as we know in retrospect, what they did discover is that that was a product that people actually wanted. They also learned a whole bunch of other things. For example, if we only have enough budget to launch the product with 10 features, which 10? Do people want black and white, blur, artistic effect, heightened saturation? What would the customers actually want? If I had gone and done a focus group and asked the customers, of these 15 filters, which one would you want? They would not have known. They would have given an answer that maybe they thought was correct, but it probably wasn't the truth. But because the Instagram founders were running a proper experiment, it didn't matter what they thought or what the customer thought. What really mattered was what was the actual behavior in the field. How did the customers actually behave once they could choose amongst many filters? And that's how they determined what the launch features were going to be. Another example, this is from one of our customers. I speak with them probably every 6 months or so. And this guy is the CEO of a really large hotel chain. And he was telling me about a story. He was flying to Hong Kong, and he has a policy. He never stays at his own hotel chains. He always stays at the competitors, so he can learn about what the competitors are doing. So he said he lands in Hong Kong, and he took a taxi, and it's one of these Hong Kong taxi drivers, so chat all the way to the hotel. Anyway, so he gets out of the car, and the doorman says, hello, Mr. So-and-so. So he knew the guy's last name. And the CEO, my friend, said, oh, that's quite good service. He remembers me from the last time I visited. So he walked in, and in this particular hotel, there's this giant floral arrangement, maybe twice as big as this table. And there was a gardener there, and he walks by, and the gardener said, oh, welcome to the hotel, Mr. So-and-so. And he thought, wow, this is exceptional service. Gets up to the counter, he's already checked in, everything's ready to go, here's the key, done. So he immediately gets on his phone and calls his CTO and says, I want this experience. I want a customer experience like that. We need cameras, we need AI, we need systems, all this stuff. So fast forward 18 months later, $36 million thrown down the toilet, total failure. They could not get any system that would actually deliver that kind of value for the customers. So it's a good story. CTO was not fired, still works there. So we love failure. So the CEO is back there now, I guess it's about a year ago, told me, same thing, lands, takes the taxi, arrives, doorman opens the door and says, hello, Mr. So-and-so. And he was like, no, how can you possibly do this? Firstly, I don't see the cameras. What system are you using? He's very frustrated at this point because he's lost $36 million. And the doorman said, no. It's nothing like that. In the taxi, you had a good conversation with the driver, yeah? And he said, yeah. And you told him your name, yes? Well, he SMS'd me about 45 minutes ago, and I'm going to pay him 10 Hong Kong dollars when he goes. So no IT, no product, no nothing. So when we're talking about how we experiment in market, please don't build stuff. First, have a hypothesis, a belief about what you think the customer will do, and before you build, before you spend anything, test it. Save all of that money. The classic view, we invest over time, we get closer to product market fit. We know that that's totally false. 85% of products fail. If we look at the lean enterprise approach, it's like this. Very fast, very iterative. We test many assumptions until we finally discover product market fit. We don't know it. We're going to discover it by seeing actual behavior, not beliefs. Company called Bourbon, anyone remember them? Location-based mobile app with photo sharing. Nobody will remember them because it never actually happened. This is Instagram. They pivoted. They had a belief that customers wanted location-based mobile app. They experimented in the field, discovered that that was false, and eventually pivoted their way into what became Instagram. Another example, Audio, site to create and share podcasts. No, it's Twitter. So what's interesting about this one is that at least with Instagram, it was location-based mobile app, but they at least had some bit of photo sharing in the original idea. With Twitter, it had nothing at all to do with what they eventually became. And so we came back to what Gwendolyn said before about pivoting. There's many degrees of pivoting. So we can either pivot to get closer, or we can pivot totally to another idea entirely. But again, neither Twitter nor Instagram raised any money, built any product until they could prove through experimentation that there actually was a product market fit. So in summary, MVPs do not increase certainty, they simply reduce low-hanging uncertainty, but that's okay because all we want to do is reduce our wastage by 10%. If we can do that, we double our revenue. Remember, because this is the wastage in new product development. So it doesn't have to be perfect. The next bit, of course, is measure smart. Because I'm taking a 60-minute presentation and putting it into a 30-minute presentation, I will just say Amazon.com, buy the 2, get more discount. The last bit is really about iterating at speed. And because a lot of you guys are innovation managers, I just wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about this principle of innovation at speed. The idea with innovation speed ultimately comes down to this formula. So every time we run an experiment, we de-risk. Right? We have value of de-risking because we're finding out what doesn't work. We still may not know what does work, but after the experiment, we definitely know rat has died, this won't work, right? Rats and monkeys fare very poorly in science. So every time we run an experiment, we get value of de-risking. However, all experiments have cost. They cost time, they cost money, they cost resource. And so the role of an innovation manager in the lean enterprise world is to maximize this formula. How do I increase the value that I get from each experiment that I run? That's the first question. So I want the right side of that equation, I want every single experiment to have as high value as I can, to learn the most I possibly can. And on the left side, it's how do I reduce the cost in terms of speed and time and all the rest. Hence, by the way, that's where Amazon comes in. But if we think about the right side of the equation, a simple idea is this. If I have 2 hypotheses about electric vehicles in Malaysia, the first one is, my first hypothesis is, I believe Malaysians will buy electric vehicles. That's a product market fit hypothesis. The second one is, I believe that Malaysians would prefer red-colored or leather-smelling electric vehicles versus flower smelling. I forgot the flower you used. All right, so that's the second hypothesis. If you're an innovation manager and you only, let's say, have enough money to run one experiment, which do you run? Well, you run the first one. Because if it turns out that they don't like electric vehicles, it really doesn't matter which smell they prefer, because they don't want electric vehicles in the first place. And so as you're thinking, there's an infinite number of experiments you could run to determine product market fit. Your first role is to choose the right experiments to run, because ultimately you have to maximize the value because you know that the costs are coming. Similarly, you have to figure out, how do I run cheap, fast experiments? That's the other side of your job. And I know we're almost out of time. So I know, because I've done this presentation before, that many people in the audience are thinking, that's all great, but it's totally not possible. How am I going to get my organization to change the way it thinks about innovation? So on the positive side, it's doable. So here's one of our companies. They're 2 years into their lean enterprise journey. They've been able to train almost all of their staff on the principles, and they're working with us to run experiments with them. So who is more slow than a large enterprise? Government. Yet government too is able to use lean enterprise. This is not one of my accounts, but it is one that is using lean enterprise and has for roughly 3 years now. And of course, who's slower than the government? A bank is slower than a government, yet here we go. We see banks using lean enterprise. In fact, in Singapore, DBS is a large public customer of ours that is absolutely well committed both to lean enterprise as well as design thinking, which we had a session on just earlier today. So, it's hard, but it is possible to succeed. Even a bank can succeed at lean enterprise. So if they can do it, you can do it. And I know it's not bad to stop a presentation with a threat, but I need to, which is that, remember how I told you that 100% of manufacturing plants today use Toyota Production System, and 100% of operations functions use Lean Six Sigma. Well, 100%, if you talk to the startups that came in and talked to you before, they will tell you they're using Lean Startup today. And you look at the unicorns that exist today, 100% of unicorns are Lean Startup proponents. My hypothesis to you is that if you're not a lean enterprise in the next 5 to 10 years, then you're not, right? The competitors are going to be doing it, and they will succeed in terms of being faster. They'll succeed in terms of having more product successes in the market. You'll still have some successes, but you'll have 90% flushed down the toilet. And that's the difference between success and failure in the next 10 years. So on the positive side, I'm telling you, you can do it. The largest and the slowest enterprises that I've worked with have been able to make the transformation, and if you don't, it's not so good. So thank you very much.